All right, guys, I want to welcome you again to episode 3 of the Church Debater and Preacher Mike. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Mr. Greg.
All right. Let me remind everybody that both Mike and my name is Greg. Both of us are members of the church that was established in the New Testament. So we both have, for the most part, the same beliefs. So we'll go into that telling you this. I will also telling you that all the questions that I ask Mike are blind. It's some that I've either heard from others or some that I've thought of myself. And he does not know what kind of questions are coming. So
May I
that's
say
the
something first?
format. You
May I
may,
say
you may.
something?
Absolutely.
I want everybody to know, because you can't tell now we're on video by looking. Greg is older than I am.
I guess that was almost a half-handed compliment there, wasn't it?
I try to hand those out to you whenever I can.
Oh man, every time you've talked about softball before and our
Yep.
softball teams. I miss that. I'm a
Oh yeah,
softball
I do
umpire.
too.
I miss all that. I'm hoping to do some interviews on my other podcast with the kids on Zoom. So we'll see how that goes. All
Cool.
right, so guys, here's our question. I'll preface it by setting it up a little bit. You read a lot of religious books. I read a lot of religious books, nowhere near what you read, but I even read, and I know you do this too. Occasionally, I will read some books that I know that I'm not going to agree with most of it, just so that I have a familiarity with what that group believes. Now, I have read the book of Thomas before.
Hmm.
I have read several books that did not make it into our New Testament.
Hmm.
And I know some churches have actually spent entire quarters talking about where the New Testament books come from, who
Hmm.
decided they would be in there, and why are more books not in there. So that's the question I want to start with. What's your best synopsis of how and why the books in the New Testament made it in there and why some of the others did not?
Okay. To answer that, I think I need to even back up a little further. And that is to say, I want to make sure, at least in giving my answer, that people understand what I understand the definition of faith to be.
Okay.
Faith is not where you run when you run out of evidence. Faith is where you run because of the evidence you have. So faith takes what you have experienced and what you know and projects it into the future with certainty and assurance. So that when we answer a question like this, why do I believe that the Bible is what it is? The answer is my faith. And what I mean by that is, it's not that I have decided that I want the Bible to be these 66 books. It is because I believe by faith that God managed the process.
Good.
So the faith that I have says that not only did God write it, but that he also guided its compilation into what we have. Now, admittedly, the solidifying of the books that we have didn't happen until the 300s. However, there is much evidence of the acceptance of the books that we have, going back even as far as the end of the first century into the second century.
Okay.
So that we then can have an understanding that these were books that were accepted already. It's not that in the 300s the group that met decided that these are biblical books.
Right.
Instead, they were confirming in a specific document, if you will, or a statement, that these books have already been accepted for centuries. And so the books that we have, the evidence that exists for them is what they used to say, see, this is why these are the books. And some of the best evidence for those books comes from those who opposed Christianity.
Gotcha.
By saying, here are the books that these people who call themselves Christians, these are the books that they revere. And the first one, the oldest one to do that was a guy named Marcion in the 2nd century, the first part of the 2nd century, Marcion. And he listed in the New Testament every single book we now have as books that the church had accepted and that they were using. And
Okay.
that's High Testament. And most of the disagreements, I think, about what books exist is in the New Testament, not the Old Testament. Because the Jews had preserved all of those books for so long.
Right.
That was pretty well accepted, except in 2 or 3 some areas. But the New Testament is the most highly debated, I think, of its actuality being word from God.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I agree with that. That kind of surprised me when I've studied it before, that it wasn't just a bunch of guys that closed themselves up in a room somewhere and
Right.
decided this was in and this was out, that this was out. It was actually more what was already accepted at the time.
There it is.
Do you have a reason? Have you read the book of Thomas?
Yes.
Can you think of a reason why they chose not to consider that an authority? Do you think it was written by Thomas, by the way, or do you think somebody else wrote it?
I think it was probably written by somebody else. And I think that may be the reason why it was not, one of the reasons why it was not accepted is because they did not see it as a book written by someone who either was an inspired person or the person who claimed that they had written it. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it didn't happen. So I was trying to look up some information here that
Right.
I had on the topic, and I preached a lesson on it one time back about the book of Thomas. And wait a minute, what is that? Oh, I don't want to get a screen. Am I running into your stuff there?
No. I don't see anything you're looking
Okay.
up.
Okay. All right. So anyway, I think that that's part of what's going on. I think it is a book that when you look at most of the books that are debated as to their reliability being scripture or not, most of the reasons for that are that it has not a verified date.
Okay.
It was written in the time that Jesus was, or that God was writing. It doesn't have the witness of the author that the people understood and accepted from being from God.
Right.
Doesn't even read. Most of them don't even read like the books of the Bible do. They just read differently, especially when you get into the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha, those books, as they are all there. They're just
Right.
different ones. So I think that's probably most of the reason behind it. But I think most of it is that they were, and I have to go back to that concept of of faith. I believe that faith drives me to say, if God took the time to write, then it makes sense to me that he would take the time to protect.
Gotcha.
And he would not leave it to humans to make a decision about something that he wrote. Therefore, I would call that his management style behind the scenes.
Good, good.
Managing this so that people would have it. And I can't get away from that concept. I have to believe
right. Well, let's close with this thought then. We know our job is, one of our key jobs is to evangelize. We can't just stay in a building. We have to go and bring others in. That's
right.
why I try to be, I'm always nervous about when the Bible comes up in a class that I substitute teach.
Sure.
But, I had one class last year that it seemed like 90% of them were Bible-toting people. They brought it up all the time, and it's funny, we just happened to be studying the old religions like Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism, and that we had one girl that was, their family were practicing Buddhists. So it really now they practice it more from a concept than a religion, because there's some very positive concepts there. Not all of them, but there's some
right.
of them that are very positive. So let's close with this thought. Sometimes we're going to run into people that are going to be difficult to evangelize because they might not even think that the Bible is realistic.
right.
That adds a whole different challenge. But let me be more specific about this as we close. Let's say somebody comes up to you and says, Mike, I've read the Bible. I love it. But I've read the book of Thomas, and I think I love it a little bit more. Am I wrong to like it more than the Bible? I mean, isn't that one they just left out and could have put in? What would you say?
Well, first of all, when you talk about liking something, you're talking about a concept. There are very many times when my liking Bible reading is not near as fun as liking something else. That's just a fact. I mean, for a person to think that if I don't just crave and like Bible reading, then I obviously am not a Christian. Well, that's not true. There are things that we do all the time that we do because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
The more we like it, the easier it is to do it. That's a fact.
Right.
The second thing I would say is there is nothing wrong with liking good material wherever you find it. I read stuff all the time. Reading a book right now, the person who is writing it is an absolute 100% Darwinian evolutionist.
Gotcha.
That he's describing comes from that mindset, and yet the principles that he's establishing concerning leaders are really good.
Yeah.
So you take what's good and you throw out what's not good. And so as it relates to something like the Gospel of Thomas, I see no problem if you enjoy it and if you like it. But to say that I like it more than the Bible is one thing.
Right.
That I believe it is more likely to be from God than the Bible is. Now, that's a whole different topic.
Gotcha. Good answer. Good answer. I've read several of Josephus' writings too, because of the historical record.
Right.
He's good at recording that, yes, Jesus was there.
That's right.
And this is why the Christians believe what they do and all that kind of stuff. Let's close with this. I will tell you that my favorite book in the New Testament is Luke. I like the way Luke writes. I think my favorite chapter in the Bible is John 3. Tell me yours. What's your favorite book? What's your favorite chapter? Have you ever thought about it?
I would say that from a logical or a reasonable or a depth of study, I enjoy Romans because it's so deep.
I do too.
But my favorite book to study, beyond doubt, Book of Revelation.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to say anything. We may have a question about that one of these days. So I'm glad you said that. We did not practice this, but that might give you a little clue of what's coming up next week.
Oh, I love
right,
to study the Book of Revelation.
All right.
Yeah,
All right. Good deal. All right, Mike, any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
No, man, I love this. This is good stuff. I'm glad you're doing it.
All right. All right. So, guys, we will see you for episode 4 next week of the Church Debater and Preacher Mike.